Hi, this is Mr. Little, in Spanish 1, Smyrna High School, and this video we're going to talk about culture. So in a Spanish class, we don't just learn about language of different people around the world, we also learn about their culture, their way of life, how they get from place to place, or the kinds of things they do, eat, and believe. And so in order for us to really understand and speak a language, we have to know how people live. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to say Thanksgiving Day if you didn't understand sort of all the history and the practices and the types of foods and all those things that surround Thanksgiving. A turkey and dressing, that phrase in English just doesn't make sense without understanding Thanksgiving. And so the same is true with cultures around the world. Those that speak Spanish, those are Hispanic or Latino. And so we're going to talk about that in this video. So when we talk about culture, we're not just talking about things like art, though that is included, or sports, though that's definitely part of it. Whenever we talk about culture, we're going to talk about two main categories of things: the practices unique to a group of people and the products in which they use in their everyday lives. So a practice is something, it could be as simple as how you get to school today, or it could be something as deep as what you believe religiously or politically. Practices are the sum of all things of how people live. So for example, how people raise their children, general expectations of behavior in public, annual celebrations, what people think about contemporary issues, or even things like history and their environment. All of these things are going to fall under practices of a foreign people. And then products, well, that's pretty easy. Those are the things that they use in their everyday lives. So it could be the kind of beverages they drink, the kind of clothing they wear, the types of transportation they use. But when we think of products, we're also going to think of things that are not something you can hold on to, intangible, right? So like their television, movies, and music. Anything that is a product of their way of life. And as we combine practices and products together, we begin to examine a culture. Basically, a culture is how people live within a particular group. Now, you have a culture, but you actually have many cultures. See, we often think of cultures as something that pertains only to a group of people from a certain country. But that doesn't seem to make sense. So we have American culture that exists, but don't you think the culture is very different if you live in rural Tennessee compared to New York City? Both are American. Both have a lot in common. But both have a lot different. In New York, you're not likely to have to drive 30 minutes to a grocery store. And so when we think of culture, I want you to think of cultures, plural, because you actually are part of many cultures. All people are. That's because culture is not divided only based on nationality. You can't just say this person is so because they are a part of the Mexican culture or the Spanish culture. But rather, culture can be divided any way you can divide a group of people. There's no limit to being able to establish different cultures. I have on the board just some examples of how we do divide culture. So nationality, lines of like what country you're from, maybe what your common language is. That's certainly an example. But then there's also, think of age, like the culture among young people or those who are our seniors. Vocation, what you do for like an occupation, for a living, or that you spend your most time in. So you all are students, that is your vocation, but there's certain cultural things that are in common with people who are in the medical field, or among teachers, or among construction workers. That would be unique to sort of their way of life. Ethnic origin. So that's different from nationality, right? Because you can be American, but then your ethnic origin could be Irish, or it could be Japanese, right? And based on that in your family, you're going to have different cultural products and practices. Or I even have listed here interest groups. So if you're a gamer, or if you play tennis, or whatever it is that interests you, you sort of get into a group of people of similar interests, and there becomes a culture, a way of organizing, of talking, of living. Whoever you are, wherever you live, and whatever life you lead a life of many cultures. So when we study Spanish and we study Hispanic culture or Latin American culture, we're actually studying a lot of different cultures and exploring a lot of different people. And for the most part, we're going to focus on people based on nationality or maybe even ethnic or language group. But also we're going to have to pay attention to how people within that nationality of different age, different vocation, different interest group are going to act and behave, the different kinds of products that they're going to use in their daily life. Cultures overlap, and that's really important to this lesson. So, what is our goal when we learn about culture? Well, certainly, we're looking to learn about another people group. If we understand what their products and practices are, we learn why they have those products and practices. So we learn, for example, about the Day of the Dead, and then we can start to unravel why a particular group might observe Day of the Dead, what meaning it has, why is it important to them. But if we didn't understand that they have pan de muerto, a special bread that they always bake, that sort of ties together the tradition, or if we didn't understand the colorful products and decorations they have, we wouldn't understand part of the why. We have to understand what before we can get to why. And then once we understand what their practice and products are and why they do it, we can begin to compare our own with another group. So for example, if we understand what Day of the Dead is and why it is celebrated, we can then really begin to compare a similar but very different celebration in the United States called Halloween. You see what I'm saying? If we understand what they do, it helps us reflect on what we do. And we can compare and contrast what Day of the Dead is and why it's celebrated with what Halloween is. You may not even think twice about how Halloween is full of candy and orange and black if you didn't see something that looked at first similar but was very different, where there is no pumpkin theme. The food is not all sugary and sweet, but yet there's still a theme of skeletons and death. And then once we learn about the differences in how we act with others and how we live, then we can learn about ourselves and understand what makes us unique in our culture. You really don't understand who you are until you've encountered people who are different from you. And by making those comparisons, you start to realize what makes you truly special as a human being. You get to understand why you say and do the things you do and what that means for you in your life. So then once you recognize the different practices and products of your culture and how they are different and unique, as you mature and as you age, you can begin to accept or reject them. So for example, it may be that you accept trick-or-treating, but that you reject the wild partying that sometimes happens among adults, right? Because you understand why it's happening, you understand what it is, and you make the choice as an individual to respond differently than those around you. And so, in doing so, you form your own identity and who you are, unique to those within your culture. You're not just sort of blindly following what everyone else does, but yet you have a greater understanding of what's going on and who you are going to be within that reality.